You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Warlord Scarr, Master of Tactical Depth and the Slaughter of Innocence. And with me here today is my lovely Strategios Majoris. Say hello.
Hello, Strategic Majoris. How's it going, Chad?
Hey. So we have gotten yet another request from our bulging mailbag. Friend of the show, Zauseed, said that he wanted to discuss good ways to use terrain in your RPG battles and the process of setting things up so it's not just people standing in front of each other and rolling dice to each other. Now, my own speciality is painting the landscape red with the gore and awful of my foes, but maybe a little bit more in depth is something you could do.
Absolutely. This springs out of our episode where we were discussing the Horned Rat and from The Enemy Within. And one of my lamentations about that module is that the fight at the end isn't terribly interesting. And I threw out a few ideas about ways that you might make it a little more kind of three-dimensional and a little more kind of interesting from a basically tactical point of view. And I think Zauseed enjoyed that and asked for some more terrain tricks for spicing up encounters. Now, the way I look at this one is often a lot of RPGs have a situation where characters who are kind of competent at the mechanics of the game will build themselves a character who has a kind of standard combat mode that they enter their combo or they enter their approach and they just buzzsaw through the opposition. And it's a very good build. It's akin to a top tier CCG list or a great war game army list. It's got a combo. It does what it does. It doesn't really care about what the opponent is doing. It just goes, right, well, I move up and engage Blender. And then they're all dead. Ha ha ha, that was great. Or I cast a 2-spell combo. They're all dead. Ha, that was great. And a lot of RPG combats can kind of fall into that, where the skill has weighted heavily towards the build and lighter towards the piloting of that build. And one of the ways to kind of make it a little more challenging for those players is to mess with them in terms of the terrain. And what I mean by messing in terms of terrain is, no, they're not a standard move action away. Huh? No, they're not a standard move action away. There's a gorge in the way. And they're shooting you with bows. And they're like, okay, but my Axemaster 9000 needs to get to melee to begin the axoning. There's this hole in the way. What do I do? And all of a sudden, the player goes from being able to just go engage combo, bad guys are dead, to now I must navigate this terrain that has been set up. Now, sometimes they'll kind of see that as an irritating obstacle. Other times they'll see that as a challenge. They go, okay, what other skills do I have for jumping across gorges or swinging across gorges or grappling hooking across gorges? And it begins at it makes them think about the approach in a different way than normal. And that's good. That basically gives you a bit of a different feeling. And the combat's a bit different. And that's kind of great. And that's one of the advantages to terrain stuff in combat. Now, you have to cut your cloth to suit your measure here. You need, when you're looking at a kind of nice involved combat and you want to basically put a funky piece of terrain to shake things up a little bit, you have to consider the capabilities of your opponent's characters. If they're all melee, a section with kind of a climbing up a cliffside or crossing a gorge, that's good. if they're all ranged, they're all can fly, you may not see much difference in it. It may just become, let's do the combo, and that's that. So how can you use terrain or the battlefield to change how your players approach? Now, one of the things you can do is, the classic one is, there's a gorge, there's a narrow bridge, and there's dudes on the other side of ranged weapons peppering you. And that introduces kind of an interesting challenge where the players have to charge across one at a time, or they can only get across one at a time. And then all of a sudden, okay, this sucks. They're just peppering us here. How do we handle this? And you can do a number of things with it. You can do the classic Indiana Jones Temple of Doom bit, where somebody cuts the ropes and the whole thing falls down, and then you're climbing up the side of the bridge as it lies now as a kind of impromptu rope ladder. While again, the guys are peppering you, and that can just be a little bit frustrating. So what you need to do, in addition to putting up this terrain where the bad guys are in an advantageous position, you need to have a think about, are there any little, are there any bones you can toss your players? Like maybe there's maybe there's a tree above them which you could basically grapple onto or something, or maybe there's some other way to cross it that would be useful. Maybe the bottom of the gorge is full of crocodiles. So if anybody falls into the gorge, they don't automatically die, but then they're attacked by crocodiles. So you can be, all of a sudden you can be like, well, I'm going to chuck these guys down to the water below and they can be eaten by crocodiles. And maybe the druid is like, you know what, I can probably convince these crocodiles to come help us. So it becomes, okay, I've set up this scenario and there's different factors in it that somebody has to take account of. If they're very strong from a range point of view, maybe you severely limit range. And how do you limit range? Well, you can either have lots of terrain in the way, which is kind of fiddly to set up, or you can say there's a dense fog or clods of ash in this circumstance. Your range is down to 5 squares. That's all you can see in front of you. And all of a sudden, then the range stuff becomes a lot less good, and it becomes a lot more close-in fighting, and that can be interesting as well. If you're looking at climbing up a cliff, normally your map is top down. If you're climbing up a cliff, why not do a custom map which is flipped effectively 90 degrees, where instead of being looking down from above, you're looking from the side, and you build like an old 2D kind of platforming game, and the players have to navigate up that way because it's like you're on a cliff face, so it's like a literal thing. It's like, can I just go out? Oh, can you fly? No. Well, then no, you can't. You can climb up this one whichever way you want, and you can provide them different routes, and you can put up ladders and ropes they can toss down and stuff, so that people can get up a bit faster.
A little bit Donkey Kong.
And maybe you have a giant ape rolling barrels down at them at the top. It's all good stuff. And it's a different way to approach this stuff. And maybe they get tossed off, and every floor they fall down, they get a reflex save or something to try and grab onto the edge of that one.
Yeah. Verticality is one of those difficult things because, most of the time you're dealing with a 2D map, and you're just not thinking in terms of how many height levels are here, how many...
Exactly. And verticality is very tough to do on a top-down map. But if your terrain only encompasses climbing up the side of a cliff, you can go, well, rather than trying to simulate this with a top-down map, I'm going to flip this to a side-on map. And I solve all my problems with managing the verticality. Now, you have to account for that in your design when you're thinking about your encounter. But I think it's cool. I think it will look different, and I think it will be fairly memorable as opposed to a normal one where it's a little bit... This one is all of a sudden, it's all about hauling yourself up this cliff or this giant piece of machinery or this monster. You can do basically, you're fighting your way up a giant kaiju or something, and you're basically climbing up its scales or its fur and trying to get to the top where the guy with the master control gem is riding around top of its head directing it.
Yeah.
And then you can basically think about, okay, well, how do we traverse this and stuff? and you can think about, okay, well, what travel modes do the players have access to? And that's kind of very important when it comes to terrain. Like,
Yeah.
if people can fly, a lot of terrain stuff is different. And maybe you need to think about, how do I what type of terrain would inconvenience a flyer? And there are things that would inconvenience a flyer: strong winds, basically different mediums that you're not traveling through air, you're traveling through water, you're traveling through something else. Stuff in the way. Basically, you got a lot of vines and creepers and tripwires or something. And maybe like, yeah, I can't fly here. This is just way too dangerous for me to attempt to just fly through. And that's something you need to just think about a little bit about. What are my players' movement modes? And if they don't have any, you don't want to make it too low. Oh yeah, there's a crevasse here. There's a bridge. The first action is 2 guys pull out axes and hack down the bridge, and now they're peppering you with shots. And everyone's like, "Well, we don't have any range weapons." And I'm like, "What?" We're gonna say, "Oh yeah, I got 2 javelins. That's about it." And the player's just going to retreat from that combat, which is fine in one way. But you need to think about, okay, how do they overcome this? What tools do they have? And can I furnish them with some tools?
Yeah, this is one thing where it's a system that lets you sort of scale your risk reward better. Might be something to think about, because like if the option is just between like move 1 distance without rolling and move 2 distance, but you have to make a roll, and then you'll just have, well, I guess Mr. Melee Wizard is just going to plod along and not really part of the fight. No, that's probably.
Though after doing it once, they will probably invest in some tricks to help get over terrain issues, which is no harm. And then you do another fight with similar setup where they can use that stuff to win the fight easily, and they'll feel really smart. And hey, you just got 2 encounters for the price of 1.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is like, there as we said in previous shopping episodes, there are groups that'll ignore your list of stuff, but all of a sudden, once they've had to retreat from 3 goblins with slingshots, they'll start thinking about, well, maybe we could use this rope or these 10-foot poles and make something of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is something that a GM should probably, if they want to have this sort of very terrain focused game, they need to possibly think of the terrain rules for the things.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid, particularly if you're making this a set piece battle, don't be afraid to, be a bit generous. Maybe pole vaulting on a 10-foot pole is not quite the DC 27 skill check that I thought it was.
Yeah, you can scale that stuff a little bit. Like, another thing you can do is you can kind of flip it on their head, where the players have to use the terrain to overcome the monsters. And maybe they're fighting in a narrow section where they're like, okay, if we get outnumbered, we're in trouble here. So let's fight them at a choke point. And that can be quite satisfying from a player going, okay, I'm going to hold the line here. And as long as I'm standing here, nothing can get past me. They all have to deal with me first, and you guys can fling spells at them and stuff. And that's kind of cool. Or maybe you're fighting a dragon, and the dragon has decided, I'm going to strafe you with my breath weapon round 1. And they're like, okay, now he comes down. And he's like, no, I'm going to circle around to my breath weapon restores casting buff spells on myself. And then the players have to say, okay, is there any way we can use the terrain against them here?
Yeah.
Can we climb up to the top of a cliff and get him that way? Because the moment he's just murdering us, and we don't have enough range to effectively take him down that way. We've got like 3 primary melee. We need a way to get this guy down on the ground, or we need a guy to get ourselves up there so we can fight him in the air. And then if you do that, you should include some stuff in the fight that they can use if they're struggling. Like maybe there's a giant's ballista with something that pins people to a wall on it. Maybe there's basically a series of ropes and stuff you can rig up so you can trap them above so you can't keep soaring off. Maybe there's you can retreat to a place where he can't use his breath weapon. He has to come down to the ground to finish it.
A tree to knock over to make a second bridge over the gorge.
Exactly, something like that. So you need to basically go, okay, what tools can I put there for them to use? And this is sometimes where some games do kind of more improv stuff where you go yes, and I'll edit in a bit of scene details,
Yeah,
and
your
that can be good
feng
for
shuis.
players where they go, there's a thing here, and they're like, yeah, okay, that's possible.
Yeah, your
You
feng
know?
shuis or your fates, where you're meant to say yes. Maybe there's a resource cost, meta currency of some kind, and
Yeah.
then you sort of players can, rather than casting around for tools that a GM may not have thought of, they come up with their idea and then basically pay for the tools required
Yeah.
to enact their crazy plan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's basically something to swing off, or there's a bouncy tree, or there's an abandoned cart full of nets, that sort of thing, where you're like, okay, well, there's something we can do here, and that can be useful for players to get creative. And what you're actually asking the players to do is think about the terrain as an additional element of the challenge. That it's not just about defeating the bad guys on a featureless map. It's about using the combination of the terrain and your own skills to achieve victory. And what's good about that is it forces the players out of just, this is my build, I enact my build here. I move up melee attack. It's like, I can't just move up. How do I get around this? This is really irritating. Like, if you've ever been in something like very difficult terrain, for example, in D&D or its descendants, where it's like, okay, your move is a quarter. Like, very soon you're like, well, this sucks. I'm slogging through this deep mud or quicksand or something, and I'm like, okay, well, I need a way to get around this.
Yeah.
And it may not be wizard cast fly on me. Maybe it's like, okay, is there any way I can like haul myself out and climb up a wall here and basically scale along a wall instead than trying to slog through this, because this is killing me.
Yeah, and
And
it is a situation where you want to be generous with, say, teamwork as a solution. Like, if you're trying to knock people out of the I enact my combo and then player B enacts his combo, player C attacks hers, you want to be encouraging them to go, well, we need to get our wizard on top of the tree stump so that he can see over the blocking trade and cast the spells. So we're going to have to make some form of human totem pole to push him up there and enact the thing. And at the same time, the thief will have to come into the side and start shanking people. And so you want to be thinking of, like, obviously as a GM you can't micromanage your PCs completely, but so it is something you have to do in the moment, much like the players having to improvise in the moment. You're going to have to approve their crazy solutions in the moment, and that means that when you're setting this up, you need to think about, well, if there's very rigid mechanics for your game, you need to think about, like, well, maybe here's a special exception for this situation, or I can use the mechanics here, but a different way to permit the X, Y, or Z. Yeah, so that's the thing. But part of the thing about terrain is it's one of those things where who chooses the battlefield? Because are we talking about a situation where the PCs are just bimbling along looking for the rope bridge, and then all of a sudden there's goblins shooting them from the other side, or have they been hunting down this goblin band and beat them in 3 other encounters, and this is the last desperate stand of the Goblin King, or
well, I
so,
think it's off. It's if the GM has an idea, oh, there could be a cool set piece here. That's when you do it. Whether it's, but it should be. It's not for every fight, but it is maybe for a kind of a climactic fight or an important fight. I think it's a good time to do it. And when you're like, okay, well, how do we handle this one? We'll do it like this, and that's when the time is right. You just have to look for opportunities.
yeah.
When's a good time to do this one? Well, it's probably when I have an interesting scenario, or I thought, okay, these guys are fighting goblins. They're going to mulch the goblins. What if the goblins had a terrain advantage here? Because that's one of the things. it can be an equalizer for otherwise weak opposition, where all of a sudden the terrain becomes these guys are terrible in melee, but it's difficult to get to them in melee. Or you could go, these guys do a tremendous amount of damage in range up close, but you just shoot them down before they get to you. However, maybe you're in the place is full of mist, or it's a maze of corridors, or maybe you're in like a labyrinth, and you're fighting a guy who can phase through walls, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay. Or he can't just phase through walls. He can actually basically rearrange the dungeon. He can basically slide new doors into place, new walls into place. And now he uses it to divide you up, and now he's fighting you. Because you'll see some of the classic tactics in a lot of fantasy games is guy casts Wall of Stone to split up party. And okay, what do we do now? Well, the answer is often we look up how you break through a stone wall for the first time in the game.
Yeah.
Now we need to knock a hole in this wall. And that's good stuff if the game supports it. Because it can be very much like, what? The guy's casting basically cast Wall of Force. It's like, okay, how do we beat a Wall of Force? Disintegrate?
Yeah.
Maybe dispel magic? It is hugely specific stuff, And that's just one way to handle it is to think of, okay, this is a force equalizer for maybe what's some weaker opposition. There you
go. Yeah, so I suppose it's one of those things where like maybe you should prepare. Like if you're thinking of this is the kind of game you want to do, but you don't know when you're going to deploy it, maybe it's time to start looking up interesting maps. Maybe start going through there's a Dyson Logos and his background and stuff, or raid someone's closet for their short-lived D&D miniatures collection and all the maps that came with that.
Good places to steal from. Big set piece fights from films, TV shows, particularly kind of animated TV shows where location budget is a function of how much animation you're willing to do. Comics, visual media, which are often going to go, is there an interesting way to make this battle look? And you're like, okay, well, I could definitely steal this, I'm looking basically at looking at like this fight from Pirates of the Caribbean and going, I could totally steal this, And that's the way I do it. Like it's a great place to go and take a visual medium and just steal the fight from it. Go, this would be a really cool fight, And that's where I go first for my inspiration. Well, look, and then you can look at basically historical fiction or historical recounting of real world battles. Like what was the bit where all of a sudden the terrain was incredibly important, where maybe you wouldn't think it was important. People might see at sea, there's no terrain at sea. There's huge terrain at sea. It's just not obvious to you unless you understand a little bit about sailing and a little bit about naval maneuvering.
Big waves can be an interesting bit of moving terrain.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to go this way, you got to go that way, and that's that's what I basically do with it. I would looking at, okay, where's a good idea? If I'm watching a film and I see a cool fight, I often make a note. Okay, I might use that at some point. That's a cool idea for a way to do a fight. Or I'm watching basically, kind of anime could be quite good. That shonen battle animes will often have a lot of really cool set piece fights, and that's a good one to take an example from. This one where this guy's using mirrors and mist, and you can't see him as a result. And like, okay, that's a cool idea for a fight. I should probably try using that one. That's where I go. I'd often look for kind of, is there, just make a note of it as you're watching stuff. You're mental note. Remember that fight just in case.
Yeah.
And
sort of just build up a little bag of tricks, because it doesn't need to be like, not every fight is going to be a big set piece with a whole bunch of lovely place to raid and entire SWAT team plans for all of the goblins while the dragon comes in the other side. So sometimes it's just, well, I've had a random encounter in the woods. What are some interesting ways to spice that up? And even just a little thing like there's extra trees in the way. You counting squares, maybe not always the most fun thing, but you could, like, there's nothing wrong with saying, well, the goblin knows how long a charging half-orc barbarian can charge, so, or like even just being 10 feet off the ground up in the tree, just little tricks like that to keep in your thing. And like, one of the other things is like, learn your players' tolerances for these things. Like, don't be like, the point here is to make the fight interesting, not to make the bad guys into super geniuses. It's okay for if the fight's going really badly and your barbarian and your fighter look like hedgehogs or just crawling the last few steps of the thing. There's no problems with the goblins going, "Hooray, we win!" and come down and start finishing off knives and and only at the end do they realize that they've hoisted their own petard. The it's definitely something to try out, because you don't want to infect your game with numbing boredom of white room fights where everything just gets blendered. But like, you're not beholden to it either. Like if your players just can't stand, I need to make 13 move actions and 7 successful skill checks to get close to this one orc. Like, as with all RPG things, there's moderation to be had.
Like, the thing is, it's not about making your players miserable so they can't do their stuff. This is a sometimes food. It's not for every fight, but it's there to spice up fights when things are getting a bit stale.
It's sort of delayed gratification. They will get to deploy their blender combo once they've put in some work and engage with your other mechanics and done that sweet Tarzan swing across the gorge and landed on top of the goblins, and had to pick themselves up and brush themselves down from all the goblin juice. Yeah,
absolutely.
It is something that you're gonna have to learn how to deploy, and as I say, just having a GM sort of bag of tricks, even if it's not like you don't. Me be the pedantic person I would be. I have like Google Drive little maps and stuff that's noticed over the years, ready to go. Or before a game I'll start googling stuff and take half a dozen things off the internet to try to deploy.
Absolutely. Like, just for an example, if you look at Indiana Jones, there's at least one good action sequence in every Indiana Jones film you could steal. There's in Raiders of the Lost Ark, you've got the chase where Indiana Jones is chasing up a line of vehicles, and he is slowly getting on and taking over vehicles to get to the vehicle he wants to get to. And that's a good example of terrain where the fight it's a convoy of vehicles and you're going to fight your way up it. Maybe you jump onto a motorbike and you drive up and you jump onto a truck and you basically take some guys out that way. Basically in Temple of Doom, you've got the set piece at the end with the rope ladder, which is a classic and everyone remembers that. You've got then in Last Crusade, you've got Indiana Jones versus a tank, where he can't hurt the tank, but he can frustrate the tank, and he can eventually. But he doesn't beat the tank by basically taking out his whip and whipping the tank until the tank falls apart.
Oh, the video game lied to me.
Pardon?
The video game lied to me.
Yeah, you don't beat it by whipping the tank to death. You beat it by basically taking advantage of the weaknesses the tank has. And like that's all basically good. You could also look at the jungle chase in
Crystal Skull.
In Crystal Skull as well, if you want. But it is about, okay, what kind of cool set pieces can I steal? And that's what I'd look at initially. I'd get some inspiration from films, get some inspiration from visual media where they're going to try and do something that's unusual looking, and go from there.
Yeah, and as I was saying about teamwork, try not to rely on one type of solution, because you don't want to say, oh, it's a mere DC 15 athletics check to cross the scourge upon the backs of the crocodiles, and you're looking at your the poor wizard and the rogue with strength 6 because for character reasons, and they're not going to look particularly happy at this, and give ways for people to engage. Like, you definitely want them to move. Like, that's one of the things, everyone can move, but as I say, like, scaling risk is helpful. Like, maybe someone just wants to move, duck and cover, and not take any dice rolls if they can help it, but maybe you can tempt them a little bit. Like, oh, if you just make this one simple check, you can get into the perfect position. You don't want to force them to make dice checks they're not comfortable with, but you can always tempt them.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one where you don't over-egg it. Basically, you want to basically give them give them opportunities, but don't basically prescribe it or simplify it too much.
Yeah. Ultimately, what you're setting up is, it's not a elaborate Fabergé egg puzzle. It is a situation, and if the players decide that their answer to the situation is we leave and go buy flying potions from the friendly potion salesman, that is their prerogative as well. Ultimately, what we're trying to engender here is engagement with the situation rather than simply rolling dice to the problem. We want to turn rolling the dice into the reward, but first you have to engage the situation and set things up the way you want. And it's not about denying you your cool build because you spent effort on that. It's just it's as I say, a spice.
Yeah, make it a challenge to get to implement the build. Mm-hmm. Rather than saying it's impossible to do your build. It's not, you need that extra bit of work before you can do it. But then still let them do it at the end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, if anyone else has scenarios they'd like to know, or as a particular they'd like to, as an advice about how to basically set up a set piece, drop us a mail, contact us on our socials, or swing by our Discord.
Until then, this party's over.
Thank you for listening to The Adventuring Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or Twitter, or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license, but you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoy the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.